probably we should start with a few introductions. Most of you will know us, but I think we should still do some formal introductions. So Corinna, if I can ask you to introduce yourself first.
Sure. Hi, everybody, and welcome, and thanks for joining us. My name is Corinna Norrick-Rühl from the University of Münster. So I'm actually zooming in from closer to Mainz, Germany.
And Corinna is co-editor of the volume Bookshelves in the Age of the COVID-19 Pandemic. Sally, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Hi everyone, I'm Sally Blackburn-Daniels. I was a co-editor on Bookshelves, social media and gaming, and I work a little bit at the Open University and also at Teesside University.
Brilliant, thank you, Sally. And Sally's too modest to say, but we will perhaps say something about her role in the whole project and the conference that started this in a little bit. Edmund, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello, I'm Edmund King. I'm a lecturer in English at the Open University, and with Sally, I co-edited the special issue of English Studies on Bookshelves, social media and gaming.
Brilliant, thank you, Edmund. And I think everyone knows me, but I will do the formal introductions anyway. I'm Shafquat. I'm a senior lecturer in English at the Open University, and I was co-editor with Corinna of the Bookshelves in the Age of the COVID-19 Pandemic volume, and I also helped organise the conference that kind of started all of this, and we'll say a little bit about that in a minute. Just to say thank you all for coming. We had planned this as an in-person event, and we did have money for wine and nibbles, so if you have a glass of wine or something handy, feel free to drink and eat and nibble your way through the evening. Because that's what we planned. Unfortunately, due to industrial action, we've had to move this to an online event. There'll be a little bit of sort of going through the volume and lots of thanks to various people, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions. So feel free, as always, to ask questions. You can use the raise your hand function. You can put questions into the meeting chat as and when you have a question to ask. So that's absolutely fine. And I'm going to ask a few people who are already here also to speak for a while about their contribution to the volume. I might start off actually just by sharing my PowerPoint, if that's all right, because that will probably help you a little bit with some of the things I'm going to talk about, and then we will have plenty of time for discussion and questions. Let's see if this works. Hopefully that should be fine. Okay. Brilliant. Can everyone see the screen? Just to say, we have a joint launch event today. So this is for two publications which emerged effectively from a conference that we co-organized. And Corinna will say a little bit about the kind of prehistory of the project as well. But we have an edited collection, which is Bookshelves in the Age of the COVID-19 Pandemic, which Corinna and I edited together. And that's published by Palgrave Macmillan in the New Directions in Book History series. And in a moment, I'm going to ask our commissioning editor for the series, who's here, Ali Troyanos, to say a little bit about the series itself. And we also had a publication emerging from the conference for a special number of English studies, which is a very well-known journal, as you know, of English language and literature. And the special number was put together by Edmund King and Sally Blackburn-Daniels. And Chris Lutit, who's also here, and I'm going to ask him to say a few words in a minute, is general editor of English studies. So it's nice that we've got commissioning editors and general editors here, as well as us, and quite a few of our chapter contributors as well. Okay. Just to say a few things, I think both publications are really interesting because they are sort of cutting edge in all sorts of ways. I think they bring together research on the material and digital cultures around bookshelves during the pandemic. And we tried very hard to sort of address the moment. And I think, you know, as you read your way through the chapters, you'll see the varied ways in which we have and our contributors have addressed, you know, the really serious issues of trying to research in the middle of a pandemic, while also trying to figure out what that means for us bookish people, for people who research in the history of the book, in the history of publishing, in the history of reading, and the history of authorship. So I think there's some, you know, really interesting ways in which we've dealt with these things. And we brought together a kind of wide range of researchers in different fields. So we've got people who work in book history, in literary criticism, in the social sciences, in media studies and library studies. And we've also interestingly brought in voices from students, which I think is rather good. And that's not often the case with major research publications when they bring in voices from students directly into the project. I think these two publications constitute the first really detailed interrogation of how and why Bookshelves became a space of cultural contestation in the digital sphere during the pandemic. It was also sort of partly a fulfillment of my own private obsession. I am, like many people, slightly obsessed with bookshelves. I'm one of those people, you know, even when I was young and I'd be taken to dinner parties, I'd walk straight over to the bookshelves, ignoring everyone else, and go look at their books. So, you know, I suppose this was very gratifying because it allowed me in a research context to fulfill something I'd been doing for a long time anyway, something I'd always been very interested in. And I think that's the case for all of us as editors and co-editors and contributors in these volumes. So the two publications emerged from a conference called Bookshelves in the Age of the COVID-19 Pandemic, which took place on the 3rd and 4th of November 2020. So this was around the time of the US presidential election, and it was hosted online by the Open University and with the support of SHARP, which is the Society for the History of Authorship, Reading and Publishing. Probably a few people whose names need to be called out here immediately. Sally Blackburn-Daniels was absolutely instrumental in making sure that the conference worked and worked well, and Corinna Norrick-Rühl again was amazingly supportive in terms of galvanizing SHARP to support the conference. And I think it was a very successful conference. We had a large number of participants, a large number of speakers, and considerable reach. So we had participants from many countries, and having the conference online allowed us to do this. Corinna is going to say a little bit about the sort of prehistory of the conference, because there's kind of prehistory to it as well. So I'll let her speak about that in a bit. And just to say, we have lots of people to thank for these two publications, and forgive me if I've missed anyone, but perhaps I'm going to start with, you know, some of the institutional thanks. So first of all, thanks to the Open University's Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, FAS, who've provided both practical and financial support to help these two publications come to fruition. We'd like to thank the Institute of English Studies at the University of London, again, for hosting this evening's book launch event. I'm sorry it's online only this evening, but you know, we have planned for a very nice room and catering and so on. But the IES, as always, has been hugely supportive of the kind of research that we do. I'd say thank you to them. Huge thank you to the University of Münster in Germany, which is where Corinna is based. They provided absolutely exemplary administrative and editorial assistance, particularly with the Bookshelves volume. So massive thank you to them. A thank you to the Read It project. Some of you may know about this. This was a project funded under Horizon 2020 through the Joint Programme Initiative for Cultural Heritage. It's a pan-European project. And the UK part of the project, which I led, was funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. It ran for 3.5 years. The project is now completed. But some of the financial support for these volumes, particularly for the Bookshelves volume, was provided by money from the Read It project, because there was a direct link between the research and the project itself. And I'd also like to thank SHARP, the Society for the History of Authorship, Reading and Publishing, and we have several SHARP members here in the audience. So it's great to see that sort of institutional support for this publication. I'm going to thank a few people specifically for the Bookshelves volume, and I think then Edmund and Sally are going to thank a few people specifically for the English Studies volume. So for the Bookshelves volume, I'd like to thank, Corinna and I would both like to thank Jonathan Rose, who's series co-editor of Palgrave's New Directions in Book History series, and Ali Troyanos, who's commissioning editor. Ali's here, so I'm going to ask her to say a few words in a moment. We'd like to thank Chandni Anant and Birgit Höttger-Bolter for editorial and administrative support at the University of Münster. We would like to thank our anonymous peer reviewers for their helpful suggestions, and the suggestions were actually very constructive. It was a positive peer review experience, and we'd like to thank them for that. We would like to thank Brian Hahn, Chandrelekha Mahamel Raja, and the entire production team at Palgrave for making sure that the production went well and on time. Madeline and Inga Franson, a special thanks to her at Extra Indexing. She did an absolutely excellent job at indexing the volume, and it was rather brilliant because she actually approached us and said, would we like her to index the volume? So that was terrific. Thank you. Wonderful work. Really, 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 really great. Lydia Pine for writing a very generous foreword to the volume. Those of you who know Lydia Pine's work will know she's the kind of preeminent scholar on the sort of anthropology and sociology of the bookshelf. She's the first person to have written a history of the bookshelf. So, you know, it was kind of a wonderful thing to have her endorsement through the foreword, and she read through the manuscript and liked it very much. We'd also like to thank the artist Phil Shaw and the Rebecca Hossack Gallery for the wonderful cover illustration. That's Shelf Isolation 2. And there's a prehistory to that image as well, because we had thought of Shelf Isolation 2 as the cover image even before we had a conference and even before we had a book. So, you know, Phil Shaw's work in some senses informed everything that we did. It captured that moment beautifully, and huge thank you to him for allowing us to use his artwork as part of the cover image. And would also like to thank Jessica Pressman, Danelle Rayberg-Sido, Annemiek Saha, and Vernon Artetanes for their very generous endorsements of the volume. I'm just going to ask Edmund and Sally to do your thanks for the English studies part, if that's okay.
Great, thank you, Chef. Yeah, I'm not sure if we should do this together. I'll start, Sally, and if you have anything to add at the end, then please do. I think we owe probably the greatest shout out to Chris Lutit, who got in contact with us during the conference that we had back in November and asked whether, in November 2020 that was, and asked whether a special special issue of English studies would be something that we'd be interested in. And yeah, we immediately thought, yes, that would be a great thing to do, simply because we had the idea for the volume, but we thought it would be great to be able to offer a different pathway as well. Something organized around the idea of the journal, the article. It could be a slightly different way of kind of getting into the topic. So it was very good to have that weigh in from Chris. And then as we worked with the team at English Studies as well, it was great to have the support of everyone there. It was a very positive experience. So I would recommend anyone who has an idea for a special issue that English Studies is a good place to go with it. It was very smooth, and also we had a lot of feedback from the peer reviewers that Chris managed to line up as editor. So we had it was a very interesting experience with the peer review there as well. It was not necessarily straightforward, but it was very constructive in the end. And we managed to get, I think, a lot of improvements into what we did in a much more kind of cohesive special issue as a result of all of the feedback. So and obviously, yeah, the editorial and production and promotion team at Taylor & Francis is also very helpful. Sally, I'm not sure if you had anything to add to that.
And just Chef and Corinna as well for kind of helping bring together the two volumes in tandem and kind of being able to allow us to see kind of an overarching narrative for each volume and where everybody fit. You know, there was no fighting over the articles, which was great. We're all kind of of one mind. So thank you very much for your support, Shaf and Corinna and
Yeah, I should also thank our contributors as well to the special issue. So that's obviously Stevie Marsden, Laura Dietz, who I believe is here today, and Simon Rosenberg.
And just to say, in a moment, we're going to share the table of contents as well for both publications. And I think as we've got a number of our contributors to both publications here, we're going to offer them the chance to also say a little bit about their perspective and their research. We're in the very lucky position of having both the commissioning editor for New Directions here on the Palgrave side and the editor-in-chief for English Studies. So if I might ask Ali Troyanos, first of all, to say a few words about the New Directions in Book History series for Palgrave. Ali, would you mind just saying a few words and telling us about your thoughts about the series generally and about the volume?
Yeah, thank you so much, Shaf. This is really nice to be able to celebrate the book like this. So yeah, I'm Ali Troyanos, Executive Editor for Literature at Palgrave Macmillan, which is part of Springer Nature. And I've been commissioning for the New Directions in Book History series for a few years, but the series has been around since 2014, actually. Shaf and Jonathan are really great to work with, and it was amazing to kind of have this book volume come through for the series, especially because many of the volumes are not as forward-looking as this one is, or contemporary and timely. So it was really exciting to have this published in the series. And I will say too that the book itself has been received really well. It's a hybrid open access book. So actually some of the chapters are open access, so you can read them freely now, or you can check if your institution has access. But there's been over 2,000 downloads already of the book. So I think that's an amazing accomplishment to see. And I guess one other thing I would add was that last year, well, Palgrave always participates in the Being Human Festival, which is a UK-based humanities festival. And last year, Shaf really kindly was the chair for our session that was on storytelling, the futures of storytelling. But in some ways, we were kind of inspired by this volume to come to that theme in the end. So I think what everyone is doing is really exciting. And thank you so much for including me.
Thank you so much, Ali. And perhaps, it might be worth sort of reminding, sort of audience participants that New Directions in Book History is always actively commissioning. So if you've got a project, feel free to run your ideas by us. So, you could email myself or Jonathan, and of course, Ali, for any practical advice about submission and so on. I think it's a really interesting book history series because it is quite forward-looking. So we have historically based scholarship as well as contemporary scholarship. So we do have everything running from the early modern to the 21st century, from digital cultures to medieval manuscripts and everything in between. And I think the nice thing about the series is that we also have quite a ambitious global reach. So we have got titles in the series covering, for example, Brazil or South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, we've got one of our co-editors for the book in Africa is here in the audience. We've had books on Russia. We've had a publication on Hebrew, which was translated from Hebrew. We've had a translation from Portuguese. We've had a translation from Italian. So, we are kind of quite ambitious in making sure that we think in a kind of global context and not just in an Anglo-American one. And I think we're making some progress. There's still work to be done, but I think we're heading in the right direction. And I think Palgrave have been hugely supportive in this process. And personally, Ali's been an absolutely brilliant commissioning editor to work with. I've been very lucky in terms of the series I've worked on, because I've always seemed to have had really amazing commissioning editors and really good editorial support. So if you are thinking of coming to New Directions with a project, I would strongly encourage you to do so. That's the end of the sales pitch, but it is a really good series to work, to have your work published. So they will look after you very, very well. I wonder if we could ask Chris to say something on the English studies side, if that's okay. Chris, would you mind saying a few words about your sort of involvement in the process and your role in English studies, and perhaps a little bit about the journal as well?
Sure. Yeah, thanks very much, Shaf. Yeah, it's very nice to be here and be able to take part in the launch. Well, I'm here, as Shaf has already said, to represent the journal that I edit, which is English Studies. I'm sitting in Nijmegen in the Netherlands this evening, so broadening the international reach of the audience. I also thought I'd have one of the fake credibility bookcase backgrounds, because I don't have a real one in the space I am. So it somehow feels slightly dated now. Everyone else, I think, on the call just has the room behind them. Anyway, so yeah, so English Studies is a very long established generalist journal in English language, literature and culture. And we do really range through from the early medieval period right through to contemporary literature. And we do actually, I think, cover that span quite effectively, all the way from lots of work on Beowulf in the early period, right through to a lot of work on contemporary literature and culture, on topics like metamodern studies, eco-criticism, and of course, the sort of work that all of you in this project are doing in terms of reading cultures and digital literary cultures as well. So I think that's really interesting. So yeah, that's a bit about the background of the journal. Of course, you can find the journal on Taylor and Francis online, and I'll drop my email in the chat once I've finished introducing it. And yeah, I think that's about it. And we're always keen to get special issues. I think often what I will say is, as an editor, I think some of the most exciting and interesting work that we publish is in special issues. It just tends to be the way that I think a lot of the cutting edge work is done in projects like this. And so we do really enjoy publishing the special issues. A bit of background on how I got involved with this. I think I would just very simply say that I think I got involved because I'm a fan of the Pandemic Bookshelves project. I attended the online conference in November 2020. Yeah, and for me, it was definitely one of the best online conferences that I went to in the lockdown era when there were more online conferences. And I think it was a very collegial environment, really fascinating papers. As you'd expect, quite a lot of lively discussion on Twitter as well as in the chat on Teams, if I recall, it was on Teams. And so that was my starting point, and I decided that I would approach the project members, the team members, Shaf, Corinna, Edmund, and Sally, and propose this special issue. And so that's where the project developed from. And for me as well, as Edmund and Sally have hinted at this, it was a very enjoyable experience. Yeah, very much liked working together with the guest editors, Edmund and Sally. And as Edmund has hinted, there was some, let's say, quite rigorous feedback from the peer reviewers, but I think in the main, the authors and the editors dealt with that very well, and hopefully they feel that they've ended up with a stronger product in the end. So there were those few bumps on the road, but nonetheless, we've got there. And yeah, a little bit of inside information. Sometimes the process is even more challenging than that. So I think we got away with it not being too difficult in the end. Now, just finally, the impact of the issue. I think it's been very successful so far, definitely one of the most successful special issues we've published in the last 3 or 4 years, I would say, maybe even up to 5 years. And it's definitely had a big impact. And I don't want to single Edmund out too much, but especially his article has really got a lot of hits. And I can announce that Edmund's article is actually the most read article in English studies of 2022. So I think that's very impressive. And it's creeping up the top of the charts because it's actually the 12th most read article ever. Well, I mean, since they've been measuring these things, obviously. English studies goes back to the early 20th century, so no one's measuring those, but in terms of recent publications. So that's quite exciting. And I think there's also, hope it's not too vulgar to say, sort of the issue and the articles have been discussed and spread quite widely on social media, as you would expect, reflecting the content. And maybe Edmund will mention this as well, that I think, is it right, there was a Chronicle of Higher Education piece as well about the special issue, so that was exciting. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I think that's about it. And yeah, anyone, if you have a special issue idea, or indeed if you would just like to send in an article, we do consider book historical approaches to literature and culture. Obviously we have more of a traditional remit in English language and literature, but definitely, because I personally am also interested in history of the book, if you have anything you'd like to send my way, that'd be much appreciated. And we definitely have at least one other article coming out in the next 6 months, which is in a similar kind of area, which hopefully you'll see soon. I can't really say more than that, but that's my last bit of sort of teaser to end with. So yeah, thanks again, everyone, and especially to Edmund and Sally, who I've been working directly with, and also congratulations to the other authors in the special issue, who I think Laura is here as well tonight. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And just to say, I mean, again, as I've mentioned in relation to new directions in book history, you can also propose special issues to English studies. So there is a queue, but you fill out your proposal form and you submit it. And Chris is a very supportive and encouraging editor, so you'll get good feedback, and hopefully things will fall into place in terms of production schedule.
I just remember one very last thing, because I'm one of the few people who has a hard copy, because journals are really moving away from print copies now. So I'm just actually going to switch off my background, because otherwise it'll be a little bit obscured. So yeah, I'll probably just go back to real life. So yeah, so there's the actual hard copy just so you see it in the flesh, or in print, sorry, in flesh. So.
Brilliant. It was one of the things we were worried about actually as we were putting together these two publications of, you know, the kind of the physical manifestation of the works on the bookshelves. I think Corinna is going to speak to that in a moment. What I might do actually is pass on to Corinna a little bit. I'll just put up the image of the bookshelves volume, because I think it's worth sort of mentioning how important this particular visual image was in terms of shaping the whole project. I mean, I think we all saw this when it came out, right? Phil Shaw's amazing artwork, you know, that tells the entire story of the pandemic as it was then in the first lockdown through the spines of books. And I think we kind of immediately thought, if we're ever going to have a publication on this topic, that's got to be the cover image. So, you know, I think in some senses often the visual precedes the textual, and the fact that we were looking at screens and looking at things around screens made this even more relevant. I'm wondering if I can ask Corinna to come in at this point. Corinna, I could stop screen sharing this PowerPoint if you want to screen share yours. Would that be appropriate?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to do that. Just a second. Wait, I end up only seeing. You'd think we'd be able to do this by now, right? There, you should be able to see this now.
That's great. Yeah, it's
okay. Well, so this is just I'm just going to say I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I'm going to try not to be emotional about all of this, and it's going to be hard. And I have my kids in the background, which I thought, should I get them out of the way? But I thought it's very much de rigueur to have children in the background during Zoom meetings. So bear with me on that too, please, but also see it as a kind of tongue-in-cheek reference to the age of the COVID pandemic. And I think maybe one of the notes that I would like to share, which Shaf hasn't shared yet, is that one of the feedbacks we got from on our proposal was, sorry, perfect timing. Sorry. One of the feedbacks we got on our proposal was that it wasn't an age. And I think, unfortunately, for better or for worse, it is an age, and it's where we are and what we're living through and what we're living in and what we're doing together. So that's maybe one note. And the other note I'd like to say is that I was leafing through my phone this morning talking to Shaf, and I went back to May 2020. And you can all imagine where we were at that time. We were kind of just sneaking out of first waves of lockdown. And there had been a lot of attention for things like credibility bookshelf, etc. And we kept saying, well, actually, book historians should be talking about this and not journalists, or journalists and book historians. And so this is a screenshot from Shaf and my conversation in May 2020. And basically the conference goes back to this exchange where I'm saying a virtual roundtable on pandemic bookshelves could be fun. And it was hugely fun and enriching in so many ways. And I think another note, and this is a very personal one, is that in May 2020, I had just started a new job at the University of Münster in lockdown. And that this is kind of, for me, the first project that I did fully on that new job with my new team, kind of in the wings. And Shaf has already thanked them profusely, so I'm not going to add to that, but it's a very meaningful book, and I'm so delighted that everybody is here for that as well. So that's kind of behind the scenes part one. And Shaf, should I maybe share the second slide later when we're talking about the contributions, or do you want me to just segue into that right now?
Go ahead, that's fine.
Okay, well then behind the scenes part two is this one at the end of 2020. So this is, as you can see, December 2020, after the conference, after the fact, when we started thinking about what outputs we were going to have. I think by this time Chris had reached out. Again, we're very grateful that Chris was, I think, like, the email came within 48 hours after the conference. Chris, and you were saying you wanted to get in touch and you wanted to think about special issues. And so by the end of the year, we had kind of set up two outputs and kind of split up our editorial intent between Sally and Edmund and Shaf and myself. And as we were looking at the table of contents, we realized that there were a couple of gaps. And one of the gaps that I identified was, coming out of obviously my own experience as a person with children. And I saw this tweet, here are all the books I read in 2020 by John Hay, and shout out to him. Thank you for letting me quote him and also show his tweet here. And I just thought, well, of all the papers that we had at the conference, we didn't once talk about children's books. And that's how kind of my contribution happened, which hadn't been a conference contribution, but then ended up being a volume contribution, thinking first about children's books and where they stand on the bookshelf, and that they're actually usually near the ground so children can reach them, so they wouldn't even be visible on a bookshelf like this. But also that they were just kind of out of sight, out of mind in a lot of the discussions surrounding bookshelves in the pandemic. And then it kind of segued into something more about book accessibility more generally, and not just about kind of parenting in a pandemic. But the article is called Elmer the Elephant in the Zoom Room. And it's open access thanks to funding from the OU. And I hope that it speaks for itself. And it also has a bunch of thank yous in the footnotes. So if you feel you haven't had enough thank yous tonight from my side of things, please feel free to read our acknowledgements and my footnotes in that article. But again, I'm so grateful to be here, and Shaf, to you and Edmund and Sally and everyone. And I'd like to hear from other volume contributors if they want to say a few words. They're more than welcome to. So thanks again.
Thanks, Corinna. I suppose one thing that we perhaps ought to mention as well is the importance of sort of research serendipity. I think there was something very serendipitous about this whole process. I think Corinna and I thought almost exactly the same thing at almost exactly the same time in relation to bookshelves, and that kind of sparked the WhatsApp conversation. And I started up a blog space, kind of series of blog articles with the support of the IES. And then we thought, actually, what we need is a conference. And Edmund and Sally kind of joined immediately, thinking this is really good idea. It's got to be done. And it was also, I suppose, the serendipity of having lots of opportunities and possibilities closed to us. The fact that we couldn't go into research libraries, the fact that we couldn't, we were mainly isolated at home. There were things that we couldn't do in terms of archival research. So it kind of forced all of us, I think, to think slightly differently in terms of how we were researching and what we were researching. And I think certainly for me, it was a shift, and I'll say a little bit more about this later. It was a shift in terms of the type of things that I did research. I think it was certainly the case for Edmund. I mean, I think it was sort of, a little bit of a excursion in some senses in terms of your research, and a hugely beneficial one, because I think it's one of the best things you've ever written in terms of research, Edmund, and I think that's now being proven by the metrics. So, it was sort of, in some senses, it forced us to think outside of the box, the pandemic. And that was kind of one of the great things in terms of research serendipity, I think. Chris, did you want to come in? I think you had your hand up briefly. Feel free to come in if you want to.
No, I was applauding. Sorry, it was
I'm going to ask several of the contributors who are here to speak in a minute. I think perhaps maybe what I might do is I might just sort of introduce the table of contents for each publication, and then we'll open it up for a bit more chat. Now, is that visible? I just wanted to check. Is that okay in terms of screen sharing, or do I need to start that again?
Not yet, Shaf.
Right. Give me 1 second. Okay, is that good? Give me a quick thumbs up if it's visible.
Yeah, you're fine, Shaf. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you. So, I mean, just to say, we'll sort of talk through two publications a little bit, and we've got some of the contributors here, so I'm going to ask them perhaps also to say a little bit about it. Very generous endorsement from Jessica Pressman, as you can see on the left. This is what she had to say about the Bookshelves volume. She said, "This timely collection turns our attention to something we feel in our bones to be important, but have not critically considered, the role of bookshelves in our contemporary COVID-infected lives. Approaching this topic from multiple angles and methods, data on book sales, the blurring of private and public spheres, screen aesthetics for viewing Zoom backgrounds, analysis of Twitter handles and hashtags, and more, this book provides a snapshot and critical examination of our own unique cultural moment, even as we continue to live through it." And I think Jessica Pressman's endorsement captures some of the contemporaneity of the research that was taking place. I think we did something which was quite special in both the Bookshelves volume and the English Studies special number. We managed to capture research as it was happening in a kind of environment that in some senses was quite abnormal. We were capturing historical methods and practice which will probably not exist in 18 months or 2 years from now. So I think we managed to capture something really important in terms of that moment in history. And I think both the diversity of the research approaches and the ways in which people interpreted the situations they found themselves in manifest themselves in the volume. I'll say very quickly a little bit about some of the chapters in the volume. Corinna and I co-wrote the introduction, and obviously because of the pandemic and because we were working remotely, this all had to be done online. This all had to be done in a shared document on Teams. In fact, the whole volume was put together through shared documents on Teams, because none of us could meet. So perhaps one thing to say is that the process was actually very seamless. Corinna is an early morning person. She's an early riser. And of course, she's an hour ahead, being in Germany. I'm a night owl, so I tend to work the night shift. So I think between us, we managed to get a lot of work done through the day, which was rather nice. So we had very timely handovers. Corinna would usually hand over things at lunch, and then I'd pick them up in the evening, and I'd then hand them back late at night. And Corinna would then pick things up again first thing in the morning. So I think it was a remarkably good synergy in terms of working practice. The other thing perhaps to say about this volume is that, you know, despite Brexit and despite the pandemic, I think this is a triumph of collaboration. And I think collaboration is hugely important. It is an Anglo-German publication in all sorts of ways, both in terms of the editors, the contributors, and even the publisher, but we also had a kind of wider reach. So I think we were very emphatic about the importance of academic research collaboration in a world that often felt very fractured, very isolated. And perhaps this publication was a way in which many of us tried to make sense of ourselves as academics and researchers when, you know, borders were closing down and collaboration was being shut down. And, you know, we had to find our feet in a kind of post-Brexit British reality, which was not very pleasant for those of us who really believe in collaborating with, you know, colleagues in Europe. So I think in some senses, this publication brought a lot of that to the fore. And I think we did a good job of being able to pull that together. The volume is divided in 3 parts. The first part looked at private and public reading spaces. So my chapter looks at bookshelves as a kind of liminal space. I drew upon ideas from social sciences, particularly from anthropology and psychology, and I kind of examine the role of the bookshelf as a sort of liminal space. You know, it becomes the negotiator between the public and the private, and so I sort of examined that a little bit. We have a chapter from Kenna McTavish on crisis book browsing, which was hugely interesting in terms of the kind of location in history, because she was looking at book browsing in Melbourne during effectively the world's longest lockdowns that people experienced there. So it's kind of really remarkable piece of kind of a ethnographic as well as book historical research. I have a very good chapter by Chiara Bullen. I think Chiara's in the audience. Maybe Chiara, can I ask you to say a little bit about your chapter? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's totally fine. Can you hear me okay? My headset's kind of stopped. Great. Yeah, thank you so much for putting this event together. It's so great to be here. My chapter kind of stems from my PhD research. I had been a year into looking at the moral and social responsibilities of book publishers and authors, you know, kind of looking at things like what makes a problematic book, what makes a problematic author, how our audiences, you know, receiving these texts and things like that. And when I saw the call for papers, I realized I could apply that to the way that readers judged each other's bookshelves. So it was a really great way for me to test out some of the, you know, it's more of a kind of like exploratory look. I didn't have my interview data at that point, but it was a great way to introduce some of the concepts and see how I could apply them to, you know, this key bookshelf judging stage of the pandemic that we were at. And now that I'm 2 years on, I'm kind of writing up my thesis now, and it's been great to see how those themes have developed. And I don't think I would have, you know, got there if I hadn't written the chapter. So yeah, it was a great experience. Thank you.
And thank you for being an exemplary chapter contributor as well for the volume. I mean, you were always word perfect and on time, and everything was beautifully presented. So, you know, it was, for us as kind of volume editors, it was a very easy job, and it's a really good and timely chapter. I think a lot of the things that Ciara mentions in her chapter are incredibly important now as well. So, I mean, I think, you know, it's one of those bits of research which hasn't dated at all from, you know, the point of the research being undertaken and the publication coming out.
Thank you.
And also in this section on private and public reading spaces, we have a very good chapter by Jennifer Burek-Pierce, which looks at the thorn birds, which it becomes a kind of iconic book on the late night show with Seth Meyers. And it's this wonderful examination of how you can use media to examine a particular book and its status on the screen. So that was something we were kind of very keen to do in this volume as well. Just to talk you through the other two parts of the volume as well. We have part 2, which looks at material culture on screen. So there's a chapter by Paja Stuthoff on video conferencing, where she looks at kind of bookshelves as virtual mediums and backgrounds throughout history, and she links the idea of the sort of the digital bookshelf background with ideas of 16th and 17th century portraiture of you know, grand portraits and books in the background there. A really interesting chapter by Amanda Lastoria on printed books as digital masks, where she looks at the kind of materiality of the codex, and another excellent chapter by Emily Belch on bookish objects on the bookshelf. And she actually looks at books on bookshelves in relation to non-books and non-book items. So, you know, the sort of paraphernalia that's attached with bookishness and the things that go on people's bookshelves. And again, really brilliant piece of sort of analysis there. And then finally, something that speaks very much to the cover image of the volume, which is Claire Battersill's chapter on writing with spines, where she looks at bookshelf spine art and the practice of assemblage. And of course, our cover illustration is spine art in the most perfect sense. And of course, it's referenced in Claire Battersill's chapter as well. So that's rather nice. And then part 3 is on libraries, pedagogy and reading. We were very keen to have student voices, and I know some of them are here, so I'm going to ask them to say a little bit about it. But perhaps if I could ask Corinna, first of all, to say a little bit about her chapter. I mean, I know you've said something already, but perhaps a little bit more about the broader issues on sort of book accessibility and the visibility of books and bookshelves and the visibility of reading.
Yeah, thanks, Chef. I'm gonna try to, again, coming from that image that I showed you before, I'm glad that we don't have to kind of move things back and forth right now, but we kind of the first abstract that I wrote, I was talking about invisibility of children's books and kind of also the alleged invisibility of families in the pandemic, the fact that many people's caring structures, care providers, etc., completely broke down, and that especially women were still expected to do their jobs from kind of usually the confines of their own home, trying to juggle all sorts of things. I'm realizing how illustrative this is right now. But so that was kind of the first impetus, but then with feedback from Edmund and from Sally and from Shaf, and also after doing a bunch of reading we realized that one of the larger issues and one of the larger challenges was not so much for white collar, in our case, academics, but also white collar workers who, statistically speaking, bought more white collar parents, statistically speaking, bought more children's books than ever before. So at least in Germany and across other markets that we have, the number of children's books, especially kind of activity books and those kinds of things, skyrocketed. So it was actually a boon for children's and young adult publishers, because people were trying to keep their children busy during homeschooling. And that, to me, kind of led to the question of what are we actually doing research on? What are we actually talking about? And that's how we kind of, as I was writing and as I received feedback from my co-editors and conference co-conveners, and of course from people on the ground in Münster, I thought a little bit more about kind of how families that are usually reliant on books in public spaces, so not in your private bookshelf, but in libraries, in schools, etc., how that plays in, and the fact that public libraries were closed, the fact that children who might not have books in their own home are reliant on kind of books in schools. And so that's kind of the direction that the article took, thinking about something that is called book deserts, areas where books aren't available. And then also, though, on a more optimistic and positive note, also wanting to think about initiatives that were taken. And in that sense, it's very much kind of a snapshot of the moment, because it talks about initiatives like food banks, which then started distributing books to families who didn't have books otherwise at home, and other kind of options like that, where I think pragmatic approaches were taken to actually bring books to children in the pandemic. So that's kind of the direction that it took. And again, I'm very grateful for all sorts of feedback, which I received along the way, to make it what it is now. And if there's feedback out there, if people have read it or will read it, I look forward to hearing from you what you think. Because it actually closes, maybe I'll add this, one last note, is it does close a little bit also with a challenge to us as a field, as a discipline, as researchers, to look beyond the beautiful book on the shelf, which of course we're all very interested in and we have at our shelves, but look beyond that and challenge ourselves to think about where books happen outside of maybe our, to use the word, bubble, etc. So yeah, again, I'd be happy to entertain discussion or hear feedback when people have read it. And thanks again to everybody involved.
And just to say, Corinna's chapter is one of the 3 open access chapters in this volume, together with my chapter and the co-written introduction. So these are all available for free, and you can download the PDF and keep it, print it, paste it up on your wall, shred it, do what you like. So they are available for free. One of the things we are very keen on as we were putting together this volume was to disrupt cozy assumptions about bookshelves always being democratic and positive and, egalitarian. And I think something we did consistently through the critical introduction and also through many of the chapters was to interrogate those assumptions, to actually say that in many ways bookshelves demonstrate inequality rather than equality, that they might demonstrate inequalities around gender, around income, around geographical access, around educational levels, around class and cultural expectations, around language, and so on. So I think we were very conscious of the fact we didn't want to make this just a celebration of bookshelves, but a really detailed critical interrogation of the kind of cultural phenomenon that we saw around us all the time. Just to say a little bit more about the other chapters in this part. So there's a very good chapter 11 by Nelleke Moser looking at teaching in a classroom setting with graduate students in the Netherlands. And again, I think it's a really remarkable piece because it brings together student voices with the instructor's voice. I think that's great. And the really interesting thing, I think, for this volume, which is something not all volumes do, is the chapter on online learning and library access. written by 4 students, Chandni Anat, Ellen Bart, Laura Demanis, and Natalia Tolstopiat. Chandni and Ellen are here. So if it's all right, can I ask you both to say a few words about your chapter and the whole process of researching this, and how you felt about contributing to the volume. So feel free to jump in. Who'd like to go first? Chandni and Ellen, you're both here, aren't you?
Ellen, would you like to go first?
Okay, it's always the problem working in the group. Who speaks first? Yeah, thank you very much. It was a real pleasure to write this because we're writing about studying at the German university as we were all studying at the German university, and almost, I guess coincidentally, every lockdown phase somehow coincided with something to do with this conference. It seems so. The first lockdown happened right before the conference. Another lockdown happened right as we were writing. So it was a wonderful way to us, excuse for us to keep in touch and sort of be together. Our chapter, so as I said, looks at the German university, our German university here in Münster at the English department. We used a survey of our English department as a way sort of to take a snapshot of what students were feeling at this very odd time, and also using that as a way to sort of look more deeply into some of the issues that brought up. And one of the things that we thought about in different ways was the idea of bookcase insecurity. So kind of as opposed to bookcase credibility, we had lots of different ways that students were talking about it. Sounded to us like bookcase insecurity. So some of those were, for example, students suddenly having their bookcases in their lives and homes on display, which was a very unusual situation and something they didn't really gain anything through, like an academic might want to portray themselves in a certain way, didn't really benefit students and might make them uncomfortable. But also then the more practical actual insecurity of access to books and library spaces as social and educational locations. And we looked into that. And then we also have a wonderful section on sort of disabled students and what that felt like to them. And then Chandni wrote about shadow libraries. She wants to jump in and say a bit about that.
Yeah, so I think thanks, Ellen, and thanks everyone for putting this together. It's so nice for me personally. Like I was just a couple of semesters into my MA, and we had the idea to do this roundtable for the conference. So when we actually presented at the conference, it was just the 4 of us expressing what we felt about, the issues of access and or the lack thereof during the pandemic. And then, when we were encouraged to sort of put that into a chapter, it sort of coalesced into these very specific areas of interest that reflected what each of us was personally invested in. And for me, it really led me down this path of, okay, we don't have access to libraries. So what are the students, where are they getting, because the work still needs to be done, where are they getting their material? And it led me into like shadow libraries and how students and like many people in academia tend to use them, but sort of the legal and sociocultural ways in which a shadow library is sort of a very prevalent part of an academic's life. And it's something that I continue to engage with after the chapter also, and I also wrote my thesis about it ultimately. And so this was, it all sort of started with the interest that was awakened during this conference. And just the process of writing and getting feedback from our editors and writing with Ellen, who is, I don't know, like a brilliant academic. And it was a pleasure to work with her. I just feel very, very grateful to have been a part of this. And yeah.
And shout out to Laura and Natalia,
Yes.
who couldn't be here, but are also amazing. Yeah, and thanks for having us, this student contribution. It really meant a lot, as Johnny said.
I think it's something that I'll certainly want to do for all future publications, to be honest, because I thought, you know, you pulled this together brilliantly. It was a kind of unique research perspective as well, because you were living in the moment. So it's kind of methodologically really interesting. You were sort of participants in your own research process, which was great. And you know, thank you very much for contributing such an excellent chapter to the volume. One more chapter for me to discuss, and then I'm going to hand over to Edmund and Sally to talk about English studies. And the final chapter in our volume, chapter 13, last but by no means least, because it's really interesting, is by Leah Henriksen. It's you know, has the wonderful title, Don't Microwave Your Books, Readers, Authors and Institutions in Pandemic Reading Tweets. Leah's actually here, but her connection is a little bit ropey, so I'm not going to ask her to speak, but she may well be able to answer questions in chat. So if you have questions around hashtag pandemic reading and Twitter and the whole process of excavating tweets, the kind of ethical issues around that kind of research, Leah will be able to give you some very good practical first-hand feedback on how it was for her in terms of doing this research at that particular moment. So I think I'm going to move to the next slide, and I'm going to hand over to Edmund and Sally to say a little bit about the English Studies special number. And again, I think we've got several of the contributors here as well, and they might want to say something about their articles as well. So Edmund and Sally, if I can hand over to you for now.
Great, thank you, Shaf. So again, I'm not sure how we want to divide this up, Sally, but I'm just going to go through, and if you have anything you want to add, then please say so. So as you can see, this is the contents page and the summary for our special issue on bookshelves, social media and gaming. Obviously, these papers came out of the conference. They do share the same kinds of themes, but in a way we kind of felt like going in a slightly different direction. We were thinking about technology in particular, and I know several of the chapters obviously in the volume deal with this as well, but we thought this would be an interesting kind of strand to investigate further. So we have a number of contributions here which deal with that, but I think really I just wanted to pick out Stevie Marston's article first, which I think does a really wonderful job of investigating some of the points that Shaf has discussed, and also Corinna around access, accessibility, and especially social class, which is what Stevie wanted to focus on. And I guess they were particularly moved by the prevalence of the idea of bookshelf credibility. And obviously many of us will be familiar with the Twitter account Bookshelf Credibility. Interesting, often rambunctious responses to backgrounds and TV interviews during the pandemic, where various policymakers, members of the public, celebrities attempted to project an image of themselves with the background of bookshelves. And bookshelf credibility became a way of critiquing, in some ways kind of participating in that movement, perhaps making fun of it. It was really interesting to watch the way in which replies to particular tweets on the bookshelf credibilities threads would involve detective work, where people would blow up images and try and work out what the various spines were, what various celebrities were reading. It was an interesting moment, and kind of I guess voluntariat book history, I guess you could refer to it as. And Stevie's chapter was a really interesting investigation of that culture, thinking about what wasn't being said there in terms of who had access to credibility through bookshelves, and what was missing from that conversation in terms particularly of class, accessibility, disability, and so forth. So it's a really, really interesting piece. It's open access. I very much encourage everyone to read it, because I think it's one of the most interesting and incisive interventions in kind of practical book history I could think about for a while. So definitely go and look at that one. Next up is Laura Dietz's article on the bookshelf is Mirror, and I know Laura's here, so I wondered if I can just put Laura on the spot in a really awkward way and ask if she wanted to speak to her article.
I'd rather hear you talk about them, Edmund, to be honest, but yeah, to be honest about and say very briefly a couple of words, it was an absolute joy to contribute to this special issue. Returning to what Shaf said a moment ago about a triumph of collaboration, which I jotted down quickly as you said it. It really was that. I can't think of another experience of working on an issue for a journal and having quite so much conversation with the editors and just talk about what they wanted and how to get the best out of the article. And from working with Edmund and working with Sally and working with Chris on this one, it was both for the better, certainly for the better of the chapter, but it was just such a pleasure. And it's been a model for me in terms of editing and what I would like to do and my model for how to do it well. The whole conference was that sort of thing in terms of just ideas meeting, you know, and improving and growing. Having this alongside Stevie's piece and Simon's piece and Edmund's and Sally's as well is extremely special, and it makes one feel good to be in good company. The paper itself, really following on from what Ellen said about bookcase insecurity. And for students, you know, stuck away from having to these, you know, professor backgrounds on one hand, like my student background, what do I say about it? This idea about the paper grew from things like papers like reading Ovid during COVID, and medics talking about living out of a suitcase and doing these Zoom conversations and conferences in places they didn't live, people being stuck in their childhood bedrooms, being at home offices away from this bookshelf that represents their complete professional life, you know, or trapped away from their families, away from their spouses, you know, working overseas. And looking at this self-portrait in the corner of the screen. And the idea of the bookshelf is something you're putting together to show yourself. This is the face that research says we're looking at more than any others on a Zoom call or a Teams call is the self-portrait in the corner and what makes that special. Chris, I was really smiling when I saw your background in dialing us in. Am I correct? This is one of the penguin ones, and that was supposed to be the upscale, the look at me, fancy reader background that has a bunch of Penguin classics. I'm putting Chris on the spot now. Sorry about that. Am I correct that it was that one? Well, I'll wait on that. But it brings in the idea of these appropriated bookshelves and how showing off what isn't Umberto Eco's library. It belongs to someone else. But it's like, oh, it's Umberto Eco's library. They make it even better. Or National Trust backgrounds is a way of kind of showing yourself, and using a transparent kind of subterfuge as a way of performing the kind of bookish self that you want to be, when the bookish self that you really are can't be shown on a Zoom screen. So I'll stop there, but it was very enjoyable to write. It was very enjoyable to present this at this conference alongside other kinds of papers, things like Stevie's and talking about projection of self, and to appear in the special issue and work with this group of writers and editors.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Laura. And thanks again for your contribution. It was great, and great to work with you on it as well. So yeah, I think in terms of the other chapters, obviously Sally and I will talk about ours in a moment, but I think I just wanted to single out Simon Rosenberg's article as well, which I think is a really interesting topic, representation of books and bookish places in video games, and focusing particularly on one of the kind of landmark games, I guess, in both gaming and also representation in gaming in the past 10 years, which is The Last of Us Part 2. And Simon's piece is a really interesting and sensitive investigation of the place of books and the design of that game, the way in which NPCs, background characters, are seen reading books, interacting with books, the role of books in the kind of main story of the main character of the video game, the way in which that plays in also with issues of gender and representation. It's a really interesting and sensitive piece, and I would also recommend that people look at that. It's a rather unique and very interesting piece of book history. I won't say too much about mine. It was an interesting piece to write. I guess when we were organizing the conference, I had become obsessed with the concept of doom scrolling because I was doing quite a bit of it. And so I initially thought that I would write something about doom scrolling. But as we got towards the period in which there was the deadline for submissions, I was just kind of thinking of what I was doing on Twitter anyway, which was participating in all of these book Twitter. Well, I guess you can kind of call it the nebulous term book Twitter. I'm not really quite sure what that refers to, but the kind of periodic viral tweets around books, conversations about bookshelves, and there was one which had just blown up a few days before the deadline for papers, which was the writer and journalist Jess McHugh had come up with a list of her warning signs on a man's bookshelf, and it had really kind of gone, you know, it went huge on Twitter for about 48 hours. And I thought it was just an interesting kind of specimen really of the way those conversations take place, because obviously they are quite repetitive, they turn up again and again, and I thought it would be interesting just to focus down on one and really kind of do a close reading, as it were, of how those conversations unfold, the kind of repeated motifs in them, the ways in which gender comes up again as an issue, as a problem, class as well, the kind of ideas of books as social signaling devices. I really realized was a huge thing. Not so much books themselves, but the kind of assemblage of ideas and assumptions surrounding books. The idea of perhaps not reading a book and what that might say. So all of this kind of came together, and I ended up writing really a kind of close reading of one particular viral tweet and its reception in a 24-hour period, which in some ways seems a very kind of ephemeral thing to do. And I guess a lot of people would ask what what connection this has with the wider kind of issues around books. But I think increasingly it does. I think the way in which we talk about books online does have an impact on the way in which we talk about books offline. And I'm very interested in that idea of negotiating value, particularly in a kind of real-time reputation economy, when things that happen online do matter, and the way in which this affects the way we deal with authors and their books. So that's my paper, and I think I'll hand over to Sally now for her article and anything else that she might want to say.
Yes.
Sally, did you want to screen share, and then I'll stop screen sharing?
Oh, yeah, I can just do a quick screen share.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, so we've kind of looked at everybody's kind of, where am I? I think I'd be used to this by now. So we're gonna yes, I just want to talk a little bit about my article, because I didn't present at the conference. I was kind of in the background doing tech stuff, but I felt like I wanted to contribute to the publications, and at the time I was busy, like Edmund, doom scrolling, and I came across an image of an academic who had her latest publication swaddled in a towel, holding it aloft, and said, "My book baby has been born." And that kind of sent me down a rabbit hole of looking at books, book babies, book births, book birthdays, and thinking about the biomechanical processes that we use to think about writing books and also reading books. Book Baby is also a company, so I was really interested in publishing companies that kind of assisted self-publication, book doulas, fascinating. And then I find now that my article has kind of come full circle, in that the latest book baby that has been born is how to reduce your risk of COVID exposure for people who would rather be safe than sorry and survive the end of the world. So I feel like that topic of COVID and bookshelves that started everything going has now come full circle, and there's so much more I want to write on it. Yeah, and it's been phenomenal to receive such incredible peer review comments, and it's been amazing to kind of discuss my article with Edmund, who is so incredibly knowledgeable. And my bookshelf is an homage to Edmund. It's full of red flags and a couple of bookish books as well. Thank you.
I'm wondering, we ought to have a screen capture of your shelves, Sally, for future analysis because of the number of red flags.
Yeah, I had to scour the bookshelves today, and then I was so tempted. I thought I might go to the charity shop and buy Infinite Jest, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. So.
We're going to open up the event for questions in a minute, but before we do, Jonathan Rose has joined us. So Professor Jonathan Rose, many of you will know very well, very famous book historian, co-founder of Sharp, co-series editor of the New Directions in Book History series with Palgrave. He's written very extensively on the history of reading practices. And Jonathan had a particular role in bringing this publication to life. So Jonathan, over to you. Feel free to dish the dirt, as it were, and tell us about the process of being, I suppose, godfather to the project.
Well, to be honest, I did precious little. I was the managed the book simply because obviously it was Shaft's and Corinna's publication. But I'm very proud to have published it. If I'm not mistaken, this is the first monograph out on the literary impact of the COVID shutdowns, and in that sense, I think this has fulfilled the mission of New Directions in Book History, which, by the way, was originally Shaft's idea. But I think the common mission we have is to be on the cutting edge, to as the name implies, do really groundbreaking work. And I think all the contributors to this book have very much done that. I think it will attract a lot of attention. It certainly should. And I congratulate Shaft, I congratulate Corinna, and hi to Corinna's posterity there. Your mom's terrific. Okay, I just want to make sure you know that. But all the very best to all of you, and we look forward to seeing all the great reviews.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you as well for making the time to come and join us. I know it's a very busy moment. It's great to have you here. And I'm sorry we couldn't have this in person because we were planning to have an in-person event with wine and refreshments and all the rest of it. But it's great you could join us. There's plenty of time for questions. So if people in the audience have things they want to raise, questions they want to bring up, comments, thoughts, feel free to jump in. You can either use the raise your hand function and feel free to switch on your cameras as well. I mean, I know it feels very isolating being online. So if you're happy to do turn on your cameras, so at least we can see one another. So if there are comments, thoughts, observations, questions for contributors, questions for editors, yes, and something to drink, that might be a good idea as well. Feel free. I'll also have a look in meeting chat in case there are any questions or things that people want to bring up. Sally, I think you've got a long list of red flag books, haven't you, which you've mentioned in the meeting chat. I think that's rather nice. It almost looks like a potential curriculum, doesn't it? I might have to steal this idea and propose it as a future text for modules in production. But if there are questions or comments, feel free. I don't want to, obviously we have a slot until 7 p.m, but there's no reason for us to stay that long. I know it's a Friday evening and you'll all want to be getting on with dinner and other things, but we've certainly got some time for a few questions now before we finish. Just to say, 3 chapters of the book and 3 articles from the journal are open access and free. We'll put the links in the chat and we'll also send the links by email to participants afterwards. Corinna, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to Ben Davies and Christina Lipton because they just this week I got my print copy of Reading Novels in the Pandemic. I think it's out with Oxford University Press, if I'm not mistaken. And I have not spoken to them, but I just wanted to use this space because clearly people here are interested in these kinds of books and say that I think it'll be really interesting to read that alongside our book. And maybe kind of see similarities in approach, but I will find the link and I will post it in the chat. I do have it here somewhere to wave at the screen, but my hands are full. So
And just
I
to
will
say that
just drop it in the chat.
Ben and Christina both came to our conference in November 2020, which was rather nice. So, there's this sort of parallel, projects with slightly different focuses and slightly different ways of interpreting it, which both came to fruition at roughly the same time, which is rather nice. It's always good when that happens. Any questions or comments or anything people want to bring up? Any issues they want to raise in relation to all of this? One thing perhaps I should say is that increasingly, we are under pressure to produce more of our research open access because of the ways in which research assessment activities are changing, particularly in the UK. And we were kind of slightly ahead of the curve because we kind of insisted on getting as much open access as possible for chapters and our journal articles in these two publications. We haven't been able to do it for the entire volume or the entire special number, but we've certainly made a decent sample available, which I think is the way forward. And certainly, that's how I'd want to approach research publications in the future, is always thinking about open access, making our research as widely available and freely available as possible, having it embedded into curriculum as quickly and early as possible. So that's always another advantage. And it's also a way of overcoming global inequality, which I'm kind of very keen to sort of argue on this point, because one of the things that sort of really struck me through the whole process of co-organizing the conference and then co-editing the volume that emerged from it, and working, of course, with Edmund and Sally, are the issues around global inequality, which really came to the fore in the lockdown. I mean, I think the pandemic, more than anything else, heightened our awareness and consciousness of all sorts of global and local socioeconomic inequalities. And if we can do something, however small, as academics and researchers to overcome that, then we should do it. And open access publication does mean that your publications can be read in the global south for free, that people can have PDFs and so on. And I think that's a really good way of approaching it. David, do you want to ask this question? Is that okay, David? Can I put you on the spot, and feel free to ask this question?
Yeah, sure. I was just the heating in my study isn't working, so I was sitting on the sofa when this started, and then I suddenly realized I was the only person who didn't have a bookshelf behind me. So I've put on an extra jumper and scurried through. So I've also got books behind me, and I was thinking about the psychology of that, and just wondering how much teaching now takes place with a lecturer with lots of cultural capital on display, talking to students who've got much less, and the power relationship is so vivid. And I was just really interested to, the chapter, Ellen and Chandni, I was really interested to hear more about that, because I was, my own emotional fragility and vulnerability was so clear to me in moving from one room to the other. I'm sure it must be so much more powerful when you're dealing with students who, relatively much less cultural capital at their disposal, and it's such a clear signifier of that, isn't it?
Ellen, did you want to come in?
I could answer that.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I guess the interesting thing was when we did our survey, we asked about sort of the ways in which students paid attention, and what we found was that most people answered that they were very aware of what like teachers, or when they attended lectures, what people had behind their bookshelves. Most people said, yes, we do pay attention to the bookshelves. But when asked about their own bookshelves or their own backgrounds, most answered that they didn't really make that effort to present themselves in a certain way, simply because a lot of times they may not have had the ability to do that, because I don't know, in Germany, it's quite common to be in a flat share, and so they didn't actually have the luxury of setting up spaces or offices or studies or working spaces. A lot of students usually depended on the libraries, right, which is where they got most of their work done. So having to set up on a kitchen table, for example, or in their childhood bedrooms, where their bookshelves may certainly not reflect the people they are today. I think we found that it wasn't a priority so much for them to present themselves in that way. They didn't feel that need, but at the same time, they were very aware of like other people's bookshelves when they were on screen.
No, thanks. That's really, really, really clear, really interesting. Such an interesting question. Yeah. Thanks.
And just to add, one of the other chapters in the volume also looks at this, Nella Camoza's chapter on Dutch students, particularly because within her cohort of students she was teaching, there were quite a number of overseas students who had to travel to the Netherlands to study, and often they had very few of their books with them, so that they were suffering from a sort of book impoverishment caused by migration, with their own personal bookshelves and their own personal libraries, often in another country or in another location, and they would only have with them the books that they were actually studying. So that creates another form of inequality and potential insecurity, I think. And these are sort of areas which have been under-examined. One of the things Corinna and I did in the introduction to the volume is we did a sort of economic analysis of IKEA's Billy Bookshelf, which kind of demonstrates global inequality in the worst possible way, because it's most expensive in the only African country where they sell the Billy Bookshelf, which is Egypt. And it's the cheapest in the European Union, specifically in Slovakia, has the cheapest price for a bookshelf. So that economic inequality is embedded even in the very fabric, the material of the bookshelf itself. And we kind of wanted to bring those issues to the fore, that this is not a kind of comfy celebration of bookishness, that there are really critical issues that need to be examined. Are there some more questions or comments? Feel free to ask any of us questions if you have them. Edmund and Sally are here as well, of course, so if you've got questions for the English studies, journal articles, particularly around gaming, for example, which I think is a kind of huge area of future research. There are books in digital games everywhere. And the ways in which game narratives work, I think it's kind of hugely important and interesting. So if there are any questions for them, feel free to ask those as well. And also, if you have thoughts for future projects after this, where do we go after the pandemic bookshelf? I'm personally quite keen to investigate the idea of people who don't read, of non-readers and representations of non-reading, and issues around resistance to reading. Because of the ways in which reading has become increasingly instrumentalized by social policy, that it's always good and it's cheaper than antidepressants and it keeps kids off the streets, etc., and improves their educational attainment. Resistance to reading has taken on a kind of political dimension in many ways. And I'm quite keen to investigate that a little bit. And particularly as a historian of reading myself, I'm aware of the fact that I tend to neglect the people who don't read, or the people who refuse to read, or the representations of non-reading. And so that might be a sort of fruitful next step, I guess, for our sort of research collective efforts in these areas. Corinna, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I also just wanted to say that as everybody's presenting here, and as we're seeing like the table of contents juxtaposed, it really hits home how the book and the special issue are both very reliant on Twitter. And Leah Hendrickson's chapter does a wonderful job of thinking through how we use Twitter in research, or I must rather say probably used, because not only are we in the age of the pandemic, but we're also kind of at the end of a phase where Twitter was used the way it was in the pandemic, and for our research and for spreading and sharing ideas. So I think as book historians, or book and publishing people, just grappling, thanks to Leah's contribution, for instance, with how did we work with Twitter, and now we're already kind of moving on to different tools, and it really kind of underscores the fact that working with a moving target is always a challenge, but also so worth it, right? Because if we hadn't done that, then that would just have not, you can't write that book anymore, really, because you don't necessarily even have access to all of that material, because people have left Twitter since then. So it's just musings, evening musings.
And just to say, I think the direction of travel is all TikTok now, right? Because particularly now with TikTok experimenting with landscape rather than portrait, which suddenly makes it a direct and actually bigger competitor and bigger potential threat to YouTube. I mean, I think the direction of travel is very clear. I mean, seize the opportunity, those of you who work on TikTok, in relation to books and reading and objects around bookishness, because I think there's a lot of material there to be culled while you still have it. And there's a kind of political issue around that as well, simply because of TikTok being a kind of Chinese platform. So, I mean, I think there will be pushback amongst certain, Western social media platforms against this. So you might have a shrinking window of opportunity to do the kind of research you want to do. That's just my perspective on it. Any other quick thoughts or questions or comments? I don't want to keep people much longer, but if there's any other kind of questions or thoughts or comments that people have, feel free to raise them now. Otherwise, I think I'm going to propose a toast and thanking everyone for coming at a very busy time of year. I know how stressed people are at the moment with deadlines and the run up to Christmas and everything else, but it's lovely to see so many of you turn up and spend some time with this launch event. And big thank you to my collaborators. I feel very lucky to have such brilliant collaborators, because I think the process of working with Sally and with Edmund and with Corinna has been seamless and brilliant and marvelous, and hugely, I think, emotionally gratifying at a time when we were all struggling in dealing with the really bizarre circumstances we found ourselves in, the kind of isolation, not being able to see one another, all of the sort of things that we had thrown at us during the pandemic. But it was great to see that, these two parallel research publications really helped us make sense of the world around us. And I think it was kind of emotionally beneficial for us as well. So probably on that note, unless anyone else has anything. Corinna, did you have any final thoughts? I don't want to put you on the spot, but in case you've got anything.
Just thank you to you, Shaf, for all the prep and all the background, for moderating and for preparing and for sticking to the plan, even though we had to postpone this thing twice. And here's to 2023 and seeing each other for real and hopefully toasting these research outputs. So thanks, Shaf.
Thank you, Corinna. Edmund or Sally, did you have any final thoughts or comments? Anything you wanted to say at the end? Feel free to jump in. Edmund?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that. Thank you, Shaf, for all of your work, and thank you, Corinna, as well. Definitely just having that kind of sense of connection, that we were doing something together that was really interesting. There was something changing week by week. There was something we were moving towards as a goal. It was just hugely beneficial, I think, for all of us kind of working in that weird pandemic period. And I think that the further it goes on, that the longer we get away from that period, we kind of realize in retrospect just how weird it was. And I think that kind of sense of kind of retrospective weirdness is something interesting to think about, really. I think that kind of lends itself perhaps to further research topics.
And Sally, anything final from you?
And just to say that, thank you to all of you, everybody who contributed, everybody who co-edited. It was my first foray into editing anything. So you all made it so easy and lovely, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I'm still thinking about the papers and the articles and thinking about how we can move forward from those. So that's testament to the ideas that were in there. So thank you, everybody.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone, again.